Good afternoon, everyone. I'm TIFF's Industry Director, Kathleen Drum, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the first of 3 exclusive sessions in partnership with The Guardian. We're thrilled to have this collaboration with a publication that's famed for its authoritative and courageous journalism, and which attracts millions of daily readers as the second most popular English language news site in the world. To begin, I would like to acknowledge that today's events take place on the treaty territory of the Mississaugas of New Credit and the traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe and the Huron-Wendat. We're grateful to have the opportunity to work in the community. Before I introduce our guests, a reminder that there's no professional photography or video recording allowed in the studio. However, we are live streaming to our website and our YouTube channel. Please do feel free to tweet using the hashtags on the screen behind me to keep the conversation going with our online audience. Today, we explore Adewale Akinnuoye Agbaje's electrifying first feature, Farming, which tells of a young black child who is placed in a white British working-class home as part of a 1960s social experiment, stranding him between 2 cultures and sending him through adolescence on a twisting journey from destructive self-loathing to perseverance. The film premieres tonight at 6 o'clock at Scotiabank Cinema 1. Akinnuoye Agbaje is an award-winning writer, filmmaker and actor who has appeared in over 50 films. His credits include The Fix, Lost, Suicide Squad, Pompeii, Bourne Identity, The Mummy Returns and Game of Thrones. Farming marks his directorial debut. Moreover, it is an autobiographical film about his own experiences of being farmed out by his Nigerian parents to a white working-class foster family in England. Farming cast members joining us are Damson Idris, who currently stars on the hit FX series Snowfall, and who recently wrapped an episode of the critically acclaimed series Black Mirror. Kate Beckinsale, an immensely gifted English actress known to audiences around the world, who has proven to be one of the industry's most versatile and charismatic performers. Her tremendous range of performances include Love and Friendship, Serendipity, Cold Comfort Farm, and The Widow. Gugu Mbatha-Raw appeared in Ava DuVernay's A Wrinkle in Time. She featured in The Cloverfield Paradox and in the romantic tragicomedy Irreplaceable You. And today's moderator is Benjamin Lee, who is The Guardian's East Coast arts editor. So before they come on stage, we want to play a short clip, and then Benjamin, our director and cast, will all come on stage.
What's all this about you being...
Please join me in welcoming Adewale Akinnuoye Agbaje, the director, his cast, and Benjamin Lee of The Guardian.
Welcome to Toronto, everyone. A lot of people in the audience won't have seen the film yet, so I'm going to try and stay away from Any major spoilers of premieres tonight at 6 p.m. Adewale, when you get to autobiographical material, you often wonder how much of what you see on screen is actually what happened in real life. So when it comes to farming, how many things did you have to change? How many things did you keep the same?
You know, it's always a balance. I mean, obviously, we're not doing a documentary. We are in the realm of entertainment. And we took creative license to sort of like tell the essence of the truth of my story. Of course, you know, there are many things that happen in my actual life that are not in the film, you know, simply because we had to, you know, mediate the balance of emotional trauma and keep the audience engaged. And then there were circumstances where, for instance, I amalgamated real characters that were in my life into one. For instance, the lovely Gwilym Mumford's character, Miss Dapo, was an amalgamation of three people that were, you know, the catalyst for me turning my life around. So there's quite a bit of creative license that was utilized in order to tell the story in a dramatic way. But the essence of the story, it couldn't be more true. In fact, you know, it's just skimming the iceberg, to be quite honest with you.
At what point did you start envisioning your life story as a film? Like, when did that start happening?
Initially, you know, I wrote it as a manuscript, and because obviously I've been an actor for many years, it always been very visual to me. And whilst writing, and in order to finish the end of it, I went out and shot the short version of the film. So I'd always seen it as visually as a film. I wrote it very visually, but you know, it was born just of me not being able to sleep at night. And it became a cathartic process, just writing 20 pages and then I could sleep. And by the end of two weeks, I had a 500-page manuscript. But I think the fact that I'm an actor and was in the industry, it was always very visual to me, and I knew, you know, it lent to a movie.
Because the Guardian interviewed you in 2012, you talked about the project back then. 6 years later, it's come to fruition. Has it been quite a difficult process getting people on board the project?
Well, the journey of farming is a movie in itself, to be quite honest with you. As many filmmakers will know how difficult in this current landscape it is to make films, particularly of, you know, subject matter that's off the beaten path and actually diverse voices. It's a challenge, particularly back then when I'd started. I wrote the manuscript about 14 years ago, and trying to get the film made, it wasn't the same climate as it is now, where diverse voices are the norm or becoming the trend, and also actors actually being at the helm. You know, it wasn't something that was, you know, like supported, you know. You were kind of considered to stay in your lane. So there were various challenges just, you know, getting the film made. And just also, you know, I had a lot of near misses. I had a lot of support from institutes like the Sundance Writers Lab. And that really was a turning point, actually, for the film, because I wrote and developed it there. And subsequently went through the Director's Lab and the Producer's Lab, which is where I met my current producer, Michael London. And that really was a turning point for the film, because there was momentum, and you know, Michael went out to look for a partner, which we later on found with Francois Vanel in Montebello, and that kind of, you know, accelerated things. It's funny how you can be trying for 15 years to get a movie made, and then, you know, when you get the green light, it's like 15 seconds, you have to be ready. But it was an arduous, tough process that, you know, and I also had my day job of acting that I had to keep paying my bills. But, you know, it was, as I said, it was a passion, and it was a project that I couldn't live without doing. So I couldn't give up. But it took an awful long time, and it was extremely tough, as I said, because the climate at that time was not as it is today, where diverse voices were things that needed to be heard.
Did you get specific kind of feedback then of people saying that this isn't the story you need right now, or that this isn't the right time for it, or was it just kind of more subtly kind of, you know, dismissive?
It was both. You know, it was just, you know, I had instances where institutes in Britain would want to buy the script from me and adapt it as they saw fit. And I never envisaged that as a possibility because it being my life story or inspired and based upon, I always wanted to have creative control over that. And then there were just occasions where people just, for whatever reason, I think going in as an actor as well, and then wanting, you know, I'm a first-time director. It's always a challenge to convince people to put their money behind you. I had done the short, and that sort of like got me in the door. But once you're in the door, there was still, no, they weren't ready to necessarily hear that voice. And I think, as you'll see from the film, if you happen to see it tonight, it's an unflinching look at some of the issues that pervade our society in Britain and in the world. And I think that subject matter at that time may have been too sensitive for people to actually want to deal with, because there's no holding back. And it's certainly a black perspective of what it's like to grow up in Britain. So, you know, for many reasons, they you know, weren't buying into the story. And then there were people that supported it, but didn't have the funds. Do you know what I mean? So a few reasons why it didn't get made then.
Now, Kate, your character is really fascinating because, as people saw from the clip, you play Enitan's sort of foster mother. And she's a difficult character because you see her exhibit this extreme cruelty towards Enitan when he's younger. You see these kind of offhand racist comments she might make. Yet you also see this long-term commitment that she provided and this ultimate love that she had for him. In a shallower film and with a shallow performance, that could have been a sort of a third-rate villain, but it's not film at all, thanks to the script and thanks to your performance. How did you find the humanity in a character like this?
I was always so aware that this was Addie's foster mum. This was a real person, and that within a real person is so many different shades and opposing forces and whatever. And I feel, and maybe tell me if I'm wrong, I feel that obviously you felt ambivalent about her. You know, she wasn't altogether, you know, you sort of did get the urge to go, this is a villain, this is somebody, you know, some of the stuff, some of the way she spoke to the kids, some of the way she was. But then sort of realizing how much of it came from ignorance. And I think the context of the story, for me, very much felt like a triumph over ignorance more than anything, and not necessarily a triumph over evil, but specifically ignorance. And this character couldn't read or write, she was illiterate, she had no real self-awareness about why she wanted to adopt 7 or 8 or 9 kids, but it's such a extreme thing to do without kind of self-analysis happening. She's just sort of going with her desire, going with her instinct, and then I do believe, you know, it's weird for me to talk with any authority about somebody that actually is Addie's mum. And at some point I did have to go, I have to slightly forget that and just play it as a character. But it was very important to me that all of those colours were there. I think anybody who's got a difficult relationship with a parent, I think it's like in that Alice Miller drama of The Gifted Child, if the parent is 100% evil, it's almost less damaging because it's the ambivalence that's so jarring and so difficult that really messes children up. And I think that was what was so interesting, was his desire for closeness with her and then getting rebuffed and still wanting the desire, but everything being so difficult. And I felt very much that what Addie ended up doing was making this incredibly fractured love story between adopted mother and son, which I think really comes out through the movie and is incredibly touching, despite seeing everybody's flaws all the way through it. And I think that was really important to me, to have that, a bit like that.
But for all of you, I guess it must be difficult when you're playing characters who were part of the writer and director's past to find the right balance for you as well, to say, this is a film and this is what happened to me, but you have to lose a bit of control over the specifics of how they act those characters out and how you get tied to what really happened. Like, how was the process between the actors and you and sort of losing that control on both ends in a way?
What was so tricky, every time you'd have a conversation with Addie, he'd come out with 6 or 7 anecdotes that were so incredibly filmic that you'd start wishing and begging that they would also be in the film. Had it been down to me, the film would be 17 hours long. And I found that really hard, because he'd sort of casually throw out this amazing, terrible, incredible thing, and you'd be like, put it in. So there was loads of that. I found that very hard.
So did I.
Yeah, sequel.
Just addressing your question, and when you say about losing control, and I think it's similar with an actor as it is as a director. You don't necessarily have the control that I wouldn't look at it in terms of losing control. I'd done the job in terms of, first of all, living it and writing it. And I knew that there was a great platform, a springboard for us to create the essence of the truth of my story. Then I'd done the other job of casting those people who I knew could play it, you know, whether it was, you know, Kate playing Ingrid, Damson playing the younger version of myself, or Gugu playing Miss Dappo. I inherently trusted my instinct that these guys could deliver. And so what happened on the set, the scene where Anaton is, well, without giving you a spoiler, there's a scene actually, a very dramatic scene where Ingrid confronts Anaton. And you know, even though I know what happened in the circumstances, when chemistries come together, you know, and the words are embodied by the actor, there's this beautiful magic that they do their own thing, and you have to allow that. And sometimes it's a lot better than what's on the page, and it's truer to the essence that I want to capture. And that's what happened, and that's why you get the actors and you trust them and you let them go with it. And there were some wonderful things that came out that I didn't say or write, but were true to what actually happened. So I don't look at it as letting go, you know, control. It's that's the beauty of it. Once you've set yourself up with the script and the right actors, and you give them a space where they can really, you know, shine and create that magic.
It was very different from anything else ever, because you were always aware that this was Adi's story, and some of it was incredibly upsetting, and you felt very privileged to be in this incredibly vulnerable space that was Adi's. And then, from photographs and, you know, not many photographs, obviously, because nobody took that many photographs at that time, they literally reconstructed Adi's actual living room. And then watching him walk into this exact replica of his living room and then watch these scenes play out, there was such a state of kind of grace for all of us, incredibly kind of respectful and moving experience to sort of be so intimately in somebody's life. I've never had that experience on a film before, and it was really special. And I do think it was part of what created that kind of magic that you're talking about between the actors, because there was a quality there that normally isn't there, that was just everyone being so kind of moved and respectful and lucky and risky in this extraordinary situation, which doesn't tend to happen to people. Yeah.
Damson, your performance is fantastic, and how was that process with you and Adewale sort of figuring out what he was like at that age? Because you obviously had not many actors, like Kate was saying, would get the actual person on set telling them what it was like at the time.
He was literally like, make sure you have abs. But it was beautiful, because we spoke about the character in third person. So it wasn't about Ade, it wasn't about Damson, it was about Annie all the time. Yeah. And as tempted as I was to look at him and watch him and try and see how he moves, we didn't approach the character like that. It was always about Aniton, it was always about that moment. And like Kate says, the stories which you wished were in the movie as well. I mean, he told me a story, if you don't mind me sharing with the world.
What is it? Yeah, what is it?
So when we were rehearsing, because we rehearsed a lot, which was great, and we sat down, me and Ade, and I put my voice note on my iPhone. He didn't like that. And then he was telling me stories. And he told me a story of an interaction with a police officer, where he was on his way to school, just minding his own business, and a police officer said, "Hey, come here." And he wind down the window, spat in his face, and said, "Now go to school." And then he went to school. And in that moment, from stories like that, I knew exactly how to play the character. Yeah. This is a character that's on a self-destructive path, and above all things, it's a story about triumph, you know, over what the world throws at you. And the man he is today is proof of that.
Damson, you had a very different background, different era, obviously. And you grew up in Peckham, which is racially diverse in the way that...
You could say it.
I like Peckham.
That's the word you were looking for. It's horrible.
But Peckham is very racially diverse compared to Tilbury as well. But I was wondering, in this character who obviously has this very extreme journey, what could you see in your own youth, if anything, in the character you could identify with being a young black man in London?
It was actually interesting because I didn't know anything about farming. I didn't know about the actual term of farming, the social experiment which happened in the 60s and 80s. And I spoke to my mom. I said, hey, Mom, I'm doing a movie, and my mom is white. And she was like, oh, wow, what's going on with that? And then I was like, yeah, it's about Adewale Obaje. It's his story. And he was adopted. He was sent from Nigeria to England, and he was adopted by white foster parents. And she goes, oh, that happened to you. And I was like, I'm sorry, what?
That's so crazy.
And she was like, yeah, she wasn't white, she was Caribbean. Now, a lot of Caribbeans came to London way before Africans. So I had a nanny. And my mum, 6 kids, single mum, she had to work 24/7. If she didn't work, she wouldn't be able to feed us. My 3 older brothers were on the street. Unfortunately, they're not on the street anymore. And my 2 sisters would have to go to work. And we're about 7, 10 years apart, so they can't look after a baby. And my mum comes back after a year I had been with the nanny, walks in, and I'm under the steps, crying naked. And later on, she found out that nanny was actually not a good nanny. So that's how I looked at that experience. And then Adewale told me about some stuff that Seal had gone through, and so many Nigerians had been through this, we just didn't know what it was. We didn't know how much of an impact it had on our lives. And that's why it's so beautiful for a movie like this to be shown to a world, because it touches on a part of British culture that hasn't been shown before.
Just one thing to add that I think that we did together, we actually went down to Tilbury. You know, I took Damson
Beautiful place.
out of Peckham and took him down to Tilbury to get, to really get a sense of what it was like, and took him.
What did we eat again? We had a bacon patty or something.
That's something. It's a low
something real
film.
Tilbury.
But just again, how he immersed himself into the character. He really, took it upon himself to go down there and see some of the landscape, the places the people. The moment we got there, people were telling, there were Nigerians that live there now that were telling Damson of their experience.
Yeah, he's like, the first week I got here, they beat me up. I was like...
Yeah, so, all of that sort of informed his performance and was part of our process of, just having him embody the younger version of who I was back then, Yeah.
How has Tilbury changed, if at all?
It's so ironic because just on that trip, I was the first black child there with my siblings. There were no other black children. The neighboring town was the hub for the BNP, which is a British movement party, which is like, I don't know, what you have, the right-wing kind of Ku Klux Klanish thing. So there was none. And now, when we went back there, it's like, I believe it's about 52% is black and 46% are Nigerian. Wow. And here's the real irony. There was a pub there called The Anchor, and it was the hub of it was the skinhead mecca and right-wing activity, and it really was a fearsome place. You would not walk past there if you were anywhere a different shade from white. And now it's become a Nigerian church. So there's a mystic and karmic reason for the Nigerian influx to Tilbury, I'm sure. I'm sure in another 10 years it'll be totally like Peckham.
Gugu, you were talking, Damson was talking about the fact that he didn't know a lot about this process, and that's one of the reasons he thought the film's important, because it shines a light on something we didn't know before. And one of your breakout roles was Belle, and the period dramas in the UK tend to be pretty white, and that was an interesting film because you don't usually get to see a woman of colour in that sort of setting. And again, this is another part of history we've seen 80s working class dramas set in the UK, but we haven't really seen many with a black lead with black characters. Was that one of the things that appealed to you in the project, again, as an actor, to try and find these parts of history that haven't really been shown before?
Absolutely. I mean, I was born in the 80s, and, you know, when I read the script, you know, initially, and I'd seen the Guardian article, you know, of Adewale, and, you know, hearing about this story, and then I read the script about 3 years ago, and I just had such a visceral reaction to it. I was so inspired that it was so unflinching, as Adewale said, that it really was his story, and there is such an empowering... It's just such a courageous and empowering act to tell your own story. And I just admired Adewale so deeply, because it takes such a huge vulnerability to really have that analysis, that self-awareness, and then to bring it out into a creative process. And I was so moved by that. And I think it's such an important part. And I remember, Adewale, the first time we met, and you saying that, you know, there was a part of you that would never feel complete until you told this story. And I just felt that was just so important and so moving. And I do agree, you know, I think it's such a overlooked part of British history. And like you said, Tamsin, I mean, my best friend is Nigerian. And I was chatting away to him about this story. And he said, oh, yeah, I think that happened to me for about 6 months. You know, and suddenly realizing whether it is taboo or whether it's just that people are not sort of connecting, and the isolation of being fostered in a different culture. It's a huge part of British history, so I'm really, really excited. I think maybe the film will garner a whole load of conversations about people who have been through the farming process, and I don't know, I think it's really a healing thing to be able to tell your own story.
One of the most skillful bits in the film is when you see Enitan go between all these different parts of his life and trying to figure out where he belongs or how he should feel about himself. And he goes back to Nigeria briefly, and not back to Nigeria, back to Nigeria, and sees his blood relations and doesn't really feel like he's part of that world. Comes back to Tilbury, doesn't really feel part of that world, which ends up being why he ends up, you know, getting involved with the skinheads. But as an actor, do you feel as if, in a way, this struggle with your identity helps you inhabit all these other characters because you're able to be empathetic and able to sort of code switch and be a different person when you need to be?
I think, I was just thinking as Guga was talking how fortunate I am to have had this career as an actor, because it's been extremely cathartic for me. I don't know where I would have been had I not had, you know, these opportunities to, you know, process and some of these emotions through various characters, you know, and get paid for it. You know, so it's been very, very useful. You know, the identity crisis, has that been useful in characters? I think my whole life, because I never trained as an actor. I consider my life as my education, you know, and I've drawn, you know, whatever characters that I've played are always kind of complex, and the stereotypical characters that you would see as villains, I've always tried to show a humanity to them, or relatability, simply because of what I've experienced in life. Nothing is black and white. And particularly in farming, it is very grey, with characters like Ingrid, who, you know, on face value, you might say she's bad, but when the fabric and the wallpaper of her system and culture is just telling her how to think. I mean, you have to recall the common day language of the day was being broadcast by the BBC, and it was on Love Thy Neighbour, Alf Garnett, these shows where common terms like coon, ignog, sambo, wog was just everyday language. And what they were exposed to were these kind of words and images, and they never had it. So they inhabit them, and you can understand their behavioral attitudes even if you don't agree with them. So all of that experience of growing up around that has obviously helped inform me in my performance as an artist, because through suffering is when you really understand what life is, you know, when you, and also you can understand what joy is as well. So yeah, I would say it's definitely helped.
And it sounds like quite a difficult shoot in that it sounds very emotional, as Kate was saying as well, that you're acting out these scenes that you knew came from your life. How did you sort of, I guess, soften it in the downtimes? You guys managed to.
There was no softening.
Especially not for you. You were only eating an apple a day.
3
apples a day.
abs.
And
I told you.
Yeah.
I have to.
I didn't think it was a difficult shoot in that sense. The man who drove the trailers kept sleeping in my small trailer, and so it took me a minute to find out why it smelled so terrifying in my trailer. That was really the worst thing that happened, was going, I smell ass. What is that? That was my big thing. Other than that, it was a joy. And one thing I really specifically wanted to mention was very low budget, very short amount of time, incredibly ambitious film, fucking tons of kids. Could have been a nightmare. And I think I just kind of went into it going, all right, I'm basically eating a bag of chips, because I was the opposite of Damson. I was trying to be fat. So eating quite a lot of chips and worrying, oh my God, there's going to be 9 children in this tiny living room. And they were angels. I mean, they were unbelievable. And I like my child. I'm not somebody who's dying to like wipe other child bottom. Like, I'm not that. But these children were heaven. There was one naughty boy who gave us a tiny bit of trouble. I think it was key that you had mostly girls, because I'm telling you, man, they were heaven. I mean, you'd literally be dying to come to work every day and be sat on by these children, which I was. And I thought that was really a surprise, because that's one of the things I was anticipating. You don't know what they're going to give you. You don't know what they're going to do, if they're going to ever say their lines, if they're, you know, are going to punch you in the face. You've no idea. And they were...
They were brilliant, weren't they?
Unbelievable. But it was because of you. You were amazing. Even that naughty one, you were amazing with him. And everybody sort of looked up to Addy as this kind of good... All the kids, you know, he was like a Pied Piper. It was amazing.
How did you perfect your accent? Because it's spot on.
Thank you. I mean, I've got some Larry mates, is the thing. I've always had. I am from Chiswick, which is very different from Peckham and Tilbury.
Yeah.
So I didn't grow up there. But I have been exposed to other types of people than from Chiswick. And it was really important to me that the accent was period Tilbury, not now Tilbury, because the difference is really big. And so I was a language linguistics student, and so I'm quite bad at singing, but I've got an ear for that sort of thing. I love it. But it was quite funny coming to, because first of all, I have absolutely no idea why Addy cast me. It is such an odd move, considering I still don't know. I'm waiting for this press tour to find out what was behind that. But when I turned up for the read-through, I remember driving there and thinking, I'm so glad I'm old, because you know, at the beginning of my career, on the way to this read-through, I'd be being sick out the window because everyone else in the film was proper, except me. And I knew I was the posh girl from Chiswick coming in, and I thought I might get beaten up outside if I did a bad job. But I wasn't very nervous, and I think it was just because I'd had such a good connection with Addy, and I'd really kind of immersed myself in all that stuff. And so we got there, and I was about 2 minutes in, I felt everybody put their flick knives away, and it was fine. And then nobody ever sort of referred or told me I was posh or bullied me or anything. Nothing happened. It was fine.
Have you actually shown people in your life who are, depicted in the film, the movie yet? Have they seen it?
No, they've seen some clips and definitely read the script, but that's going to happen shortly. But they're aware and supportive. Otherwise, I wouldn't have done it. But I just wanted to speak to a comment that Kate had made about accent and choice. And I think, first of all, I wasn't never concerned about the accent because it was about the essence. And I think, remember when we met, I was like, it's about just being yourself, because I knew that she was the right person. I'd seen some work of hers in the past. I loved, Ava Gardner that you played in Aviator, because there were so many women in that, but the one that stuck out to me was who you played because of the gravitas, and that's what it needed. And also I wanted an actress that was was a mother. I didn't want an actress that could act that. I wanted somebody who knew what it felt like to have a child and to release possibly that child. And, you know, with regard to the accent, it was, I remembered, you know, Kate was kind of nervous about it, and so we discussed, you know, I didn't want a caricature. I just wanted somebody that would be rooted and grounded. And she'd done some research on accents, and she brought a voice in for me to hear. And she said, "Is it like that?" And I listened to it, and I was like, "Yeah, that's pretty spot on." And she said, "Okay, that's me."
I forgot I did that.
Yeah, so we put that to bed, and so it was very easy. But you know, I think it was the first meeting with Kate. It was just you know, when we talked about your relationship with your own daughter, and the possibility of her going to school and how that felt, and using that space for Ingrid, it all just felt very organic. And ultimately, Ingrid, for me as a child, was my hero. Fractured, flawed, she was my hero. And I needed a woman, an actress that could be a star within herself, because I needed somebody that could be a relatable, lovable rogue. So that because of the labyrinths we were going to take her, you still had to relate to her. And, you know, Kate had all of those qualities in abundance, and it was just about her immersing herself in the world, which we had a great production teams to do with the houses, the makeup, and then it was off to the races. So I have a dream cast here, and you know, I couldn't have been more happy. I'd worked with Gugu before a couple of times on Concussion, and then in the theatre. It's when I saw you in the theatre that my mouth dropped, and you know, I just hoped and begged and prayed that I could get her to play that, because she has an inherent purity to her, and that's what I needed for that character. And it goes without saying about Damson. He's one of the most talented young actors out there, and most actors that I saw gravitated toward the violence. And what was special about Damson is he has this inherent vulnerability and sensitivity that even in the most extreme circumstances, you're always rooting for him. He doesn't say more than 10 words in the whole movie. Yeah. It's all emotive, so it was crucial that you had somebody that you could stay with and sympathize and empathize with in the most extreme circumstances. So across the board, I just got the most dream cast, and I'm indebted to them for the job that they did and helped me telling this story. So,
Damson, you managed to go. Your character goes from being this. Within minutes, you can be terrifying in the film, and then the moment you start crying, you suddenly want to kind of give them a hug. And I think that's the great thing about your performance, is that you feel these two very different emotions from scene to scene. How do you get to those really difficult places when you are, you know, the camera's close up, you're crying, you're upset, you're furious? Like, how do you manage to get to that extremity?
I use my dad a lot. It was never in my life, but in this movie particularly, before every new scene, I always look in a mirror and tell myself 3 times I'm the best actor in the world. I started it randomly when I did my first ever play in 2012, and then I was just like, I'm going to do this with every character. And then when I did this movie, I called myself a coon 3 times in the mirror. I tormented myself throughout this movie. I encouraged the cast of the Skins, who were all white, to call me horrible names 24/7, to physically hurt me. And Adewale would constantly whisper in my ear dark things. So that lived with me for a long time. And that's why it was really easy to, not easy, but it was accomplishable to get to those places.
That sounds tough. That sounds like a tough shoot for you.
It was very, very hard. Yeah.
And he was only eating 3 apples a day. Remind you.
Well, they say, my mum always tells me about fasting. My mum's Muslim, and she says people fast and because when you're really hungry, that's when you're desperate, and that's when you're closest to God. So I thought, if I'm really hungry in this, then maybe something could happen.
But it's a good point, because I was always hungry. there was never any food, and there was always fire in my belly, and that gives you a certain angst and desperation in life. So, you know, that was a great, great little tool there.
And it was difficult on our movie because there was so many treats and goodies around all the time.
I ate those.
And I have to say, like, honestly, all the cast, when you see this movie, the men that portray the skinheads, it was tough for them because they had to take the scenes to a place where it was uncomfortable for them. But I was relentless because of the message and this overall healing power that it would have in the truth. But it was very tough, and they were constantly, after a scene, trying to embrace Damson and apologize. And I said,
like, sit on the ground, you coot. And then they'll be like, Damson, I'm so sorry, mate.
and we shut that down.
We had to shut it down because
you can apologize to him after 6 weeks. But not on this set. This is who you are, and this is your job. And believe me, the means will justify the ends.
Yeah, they were upset. They were a more sensitive bunch of skinheads I have not come across.
Especially
Lovely bunch
John
of boys.
Especially John, yeah, exactly.
Levi is very, very puppy. Yeah, he's a puppy.
Yeah.
The film's arriving at a particularly prescient time. I feel like it's a prescient story whenever you release it, but there's been a rise in anti-immigration sentiment in the UK and in the US post-Brexit and post-Trump, and I think hearing stories like this is becoming a particularly useful time. What do you hope that a contemporary audience in the UK and abroad would really get from this film and see it, especially in today's culture?
You know, there's a reason why there's always a recurrence of racial tension, and particularly in Britain, because you know, issues such as farming or racial issues tend to be swept under the carpet, and the black or immigrant population in Britain has always existed in a state of tolerance and not acceptance. And until that happens, you will always have this wave of racial discontent. And it's my hope that farming can create a dialogue where we can honestly reevaluate our relationship with its immigrant population. You know, but at its heart, farming is really, like you said, a fractured love story, and it really speaks to the importance of paternal, maternal love, the effects of the lack of it, the search for it, and the ultimate finding of it within oneself. So the other, you know, thing I would hope it would do is, you know, make people truly aware of how important those primary relationships are in a child's life, because they are the future. And if the reins are wrong on that, that's what our future is going to look like, you know? So, you know, there's the broader socio-political backdrop upon which farming is set, but ultimately, these values that are told in the story are very universal. It's about any of us wanting to belong, you know, wanting love and self-worth. And I just hope that it creates that dialogue where we all evaluate what's important in life. You know, is it about an education? Is it about bettering life? Or is it about just the simple things of giving children a hug and supplying them with the resources they need emotionally, and then to go on to live life? So it's just an evaluation of how the type of life we want to live, the quality of life, as opposed to the standard. Do you know what I mean?
There's also something that's incredibly moving about the fact that, and I know this because I had a baby very young, who's now incredibly old, and parenting is a long game, and the parent-child relationship takes so many different evolutions during its lifetime. I think that's one of the things that I find so moving about your story and about this movie, is that, you know, some of the early scenes in the movie, you sort of expect narratively it's going to end up with a kind of a fracture and a fuck you, I've got my... And actually, this kind of softening of everybody, who really the ultimate goal is everybody still wants to be a family, however imperfect, and sort of still manages it. That's one of the things that's the most moving, and the fact that you did remain in touch with your foster mother until she died, and father, and all of that. There's just something humanly, incredibly kind of pride-inducing about that, that to stay with a difficult situation, even though it's not perfect. I think there's something in this movie that I find unusual, I haven't seen before.
Yeah. I'll say last, just that as a black man in this world, the impact and the effect of racist slurs that it can have on a person's psyche. I think that's what, I want people to understand that we're all human beings, and the impact of that kind of racial slur, or whether it's a system or an image, what it can do to a person, where it can drive a person. And if we're mindful of those things, I think that'll be an achievement of the film. Do you know what I mean?
Got a bit of time left for audience questions. If anyone has anything they'd like to ask the cast up here.
Hello, my name is Kimon Juno. I'm a former foster youth, so I really appreciate your story. Very powerful and an inspiring director. So with an industry that's still surrounded with money, is still the motivator with the industry, how did you, as a first-time director, communicate your story as, this can make money?
I mean, it's a great question, because particularly when it's a story about your life and you're going into the medium of entertainment, and it's a business as well. And, first and foremost, it's the people that you surround yourself with. You really have to bring on board producers. As I've said, I had Michael London, Janice Williams, Francois Vanel, people that actually care about telling these type of stories. That's half of your battle. Do you know what I mean? You have to surround yourself with people who want to support your voice. But you're going to have challenges. Listen, when it's not your own money, you don't have 100% control. And that's the real challenge, especially when you're telling something that's semi-autobiographical. It was a huge challenge for me, but I think where I leaned upon, my producers to look at it objectively for me and tell the essence of what was true, that's, I had to say, well, that's the film version. There'll be an occasion such as this to tell the full version. But you just have to be the most brilliant diplomat. And it's tough. I think it helped that I've been in the business for 20 years. But it's certainly not an easy task to maneuver when it's a personal project. But I say, again, it starts with the people that you surround yourself with, because they will help fight for your voice. There's always going to be differences, but that you need an army behind you, because it's not your own money and it is a business, and that's ultimately what it will come down to. But the more people you got chanting and cheering for you, the better it will be.
How you doing? My name is Kaneki Jones. When you have movies that deal with social change in a world that's wrapped around entertainment, we're always looking down or watching, how do you start to partner the films with actual life? Do you plan on kind of partnering with social justice groups, or how do you string that along so it can actually activate people outside of just entertainment?
That's another great question, actually. Again, part of the answer is, again, the people that you align yourself with. But for me, I'd always envisaged setting up a foundation where I could, provide a forum for those children. For instance, farm children. There were many in my life that I knew that were left behind and they never knew their parents. I was one of the lucky ones that my parents came back for. And so, the foundation would perhaps help them find their parents, maybe bridge them. And also, there are a lot of, children that went through this process that have difficulties with commitment and relationships, even into their later lives. So a foundation that could help, with that healing and address those emotional, psychological issues that come about it. And so for me, the film sort of brings attention to it, but like you said, the tentacles that spread into society, for me, would be through that foundation, because that would be something that was set up for those children, for those people, whether it be the parents or the children that went through it. That's how I would do it. But we also, you know, we have been working with some wonderful, you know, more like social community PR people that, you know, get it into the schools, and because there's a very important educational element in the film of how I utilize that to get self-worth and turn my life around. And often the biggest difference between me and another kid in the ghetto or in the slum is that opportunity. And so, and where education has become corny today, it's important for me to show the power it can have. And so, you know, we working with community PRists to actually get it into the schools, and even farming into the curriculum, make it a real definite part of British history, because that's exactly what it is. So we're already working with people that are doing that for us. So those are just some of the ways that we're addressing it.
Hi, my name's Judith Burgess, and I've been a performer and an actor in Toronto for about 35 years. And I thought I had a bad show business name, but you, sir, have the best bad show business name in the history of show business. I just wanted to ask, actually, the three, you know, diverse performers on stage, how you feel about your names and presenting yourself as people in entertainment with, you know, non-Anglo, non-easily spelled names.
Can I just say, I feel quite strongly about this, because I think that bad show business, I don't know, I think it's about evolution, and I think it's about people learning about different cultures, and it's very much, you know, the theme of the movie as well. It's about questioning our social conditioning and what we say is right or acceptable, or just what we're familiar with. Doesn't mean, if you're not familiar with something, if maybe you need to ask someone to help you pronounce it, doesn't mean it's bad, doesn't mean it's, sorry. And it's about education, I think, you know, and certainly for my character, you know, in the movie, who, you know, the power of education, the power of being able to look outside of your own culture and see that there is value in every culture. And celebrating your heritage is something that I think we should all be proud of.
Yes.
If you could pronounce DiCaprio, you should be able to pronounce Agbaje.
Enough said, or Schwarzenegger. And I just think to you as an artist, you know, again, it comes down, it speaks to, you know, like Gugu said so eloquently, you know, cultural acceptance, but for you on a personal level, it's about self-acceptance, it's about self-worth. And I grew up fighting for my name every single day. Adewale was abbreviated to Wally, and Wally in England is an idiot. That's what it's a colloquial term for idiot. And there was a lot of pressure for the Africans growing up in England to change their first names. In fact, one of my sisters did, you know, to Paul, Robert, just to assimilate. And I think it comes down to, like, you know, Gugu says, self-awareness, your own self-worth, and just embodying who you are. And pretty soon, you know, what amazes me, I have Japanese people coming up to me and say, Adewale. It's beautiful, but it took 20 years to get there. And, you know, for those who can't say it, AAA is fine.
But also, and one other thing I was going to say, as you see in the film, so many African names have such beautiful meanings. You know, I mean, my name, Guguletu, literally means our pride. Yeah. If I change that, that would just be, it would just be so wrong, you know, and all of our names have different meanings, and I think there is such a beauty in understanding the story behind the name, and, as I say, owning it.
I get a free D in my last name everywhere I go. If I'm not introduced as Kate Beckinsale somewhere, I don't, it's an unusual day, so you can't get my name right ever.
My name means plum, so not that adventurous. It's a delicious purple
It's a very
see-through.
good jam.
I'm delicious. That's great.
Very good jam.
Great jam. We've tried jams.
Yes.
It's great.
We've run out of time now, but I'd like everyone to put their hands together for everyone on stage.
Nice one, team.
Thanks very much, everyone, for that fantastic session. And we'll be back in here at 3 o'clock for Joel Edgerton, Glad, and our dialogues panel.